Tonight, we have a special broadcast focusing on smartphones and steps. That's in our world-focused discussion. Now, could this new study by Stanford researchers perhaps help cure obesity? And how accurate is the study? Plus, what's cooking with our popular friend from the south, Sashikala, in a Bengaluru prison? This as Karnataka's chief minister launches a probe into alleged bribery behind bars. We'll get to that story shortly, but first, the story we're focusing on is about obesity and smartphones. Well, Stanford researchers have now found intriguing clues about obesity by simply counting the number of steps that people have taken through this, something that we all have, our smartphones. Well, it tracks the movement, it tracks how, the age, the gender, and it gives a glimpse of which countries are the fittest and which countries are the fattest. The global study is based on daily steps. It is counted by smartphone sensors and tracks all activity inequality as well. It's sort of like income equality, except that the steps are step poors, which will mean that the countries are more obese, and step rich, which means the countries are more likely fit. Here's the report.
A recent study from Nature, which tracked more than 700,000 men and women from more than 100 countries over a period of 95 days, is giving new perspective about which country is fit and which one is not. Stanford researchers used smartphones to track thousands of people and found that in countries with little obesity, people mostly walk the same amount per day. But big gaps between people who walked a lot and those who walked very little resulted in higher obesity. Reports say every year 5 million people die from physical inactivity. So why is obesity a huge issue in some parts of the world and not in others? The study found that men walk more than women. Researchers hope that this will help improve public health campaigns against obesity and to make cities more walkable. So how did smartphones track people's steps and how accurate is this data? These phones have tiny sensors called accelerometers that can record stepping motions. The data can provide key health info like age, gender, height, weight, and even body mass index. Nearly 70% of adults carry smartphones in developed countries, and more than half of the people in developing countries have one. Sweden has the smallest gaps between activity-rich and activity-poor, and the same results with male and female steps. It also has the lowest rates of obesity. The US ranked 4th from the bottom in overall activity inequality and a huge gap between activity-rich and activity-poor, and has high levels of obesity. Researchers also studied 69 cities to see if there was a correlation, including how walkable a city is, how pedestrian-friendly it is, and the ease of walking to shops and restaurants. Researchers found a well-planned city did have better health impacts. Bureau Report, WION.
All right, to get perspective on our world-focused story tonight, we have Ira Trivedi, an author and columnist, as well as a yoga expert from Mumbai. We also have Chetan Vaidya, the Director of School and Planning and Architecture from New Delhi. Thank you both for joining us here. We'll start with you. This study, well, the talks about smartphones and steps and really trying to link which countries are fat and which countries are fit. I mean, how do we take that? Is that with a grain of salt, or is there something to this, given that it's coming from Stanford researchers? Ira?
I think there is definitely something to this study, and they're pretty pertinent. I think the U.S. statistics are very valid. I've lived in the U.S. and had the same experience. I think the disparity between the rich and the poor is pretty prominent. I also think that between men and women, it shows that men are walking more. That makes a lot of sense as well. So I do think that technology has given us access to very, very good data, and we should try to use it. Women need to be more aware that they're not walking as much. The wealthy who are spending more times in offices and in corporate jobs there's a huge issue. As a yoga practitioner, as a teacher, I see this. I see this with my students. Their mobility in their spine, in their legs, it's very, very poor. And as people are aging, it's getting worse and worse. In fact, amongst my student group, I'm seeing now a lot of spinal injuries because people are not moving as much, because they're stationary and spending so much time in stationary positions. They wake up, they go into their car, they go into an office, and they hardly walk at all. And walking is actually very important. It's very different than going to the gym. you can't really say that, if you go and run for half an hour, that's equal to the whole day of walking and moving. As human beings, our bodies are designed to be moving. We're supposed to be walking. In fact, sitting for long hours is not good for our bodies. It causes a lot of damage, especially sitting in chairs. And that is why there are increased instances of spinal injuries. We're seeing a lot more back pain, a lot more cervical injuries. Smartphones have obviously added to the issue because there's a lot of neck strain. We're constantly looking down at our phones. So I do think that these studies are shedding a lot of light on human nature about how we're moving, and I think we take a little bit more seriously.
Let's bring Chetan into the conversation. Chetan, let me ask you with regards to this, from an architectural perspective, are certain cities, certain countries better laying the road for, no pun intended, to make people more fit? I mean, cities in the U.S. like San Francisco and Austin, I mean, you see people out and about all the time, jogging, working out, and there really is that culture to really get people out and about. But other parts of the world where maybe the infrastructure isn't so solid, is that perhaps hindering them, ultimately making them more obese? Your thoughts?
I agree with what you said. Urban planning is very important to relate to walking and use of cycle. The more we make our cities and roads and streets more walking friendly, the people will be walking more and they will be healthier. And this should be an important point of developing our urban planning processes. As part of the smart city mission, it has become extremely important that we have parks which are livable, which are sustainable, and also streets which could make people walk. But in India, we have just made a beginning. And because of the Prime Minister program of Yoga, International Yoga Day, more and more people are becoming conscious about walking, cycling, and yoga. But we are a long way from achieving our objectives, and I think urban planning has an important role to play in this. This would mean that our method of planning, where we used to keep land use separately, not linking with public transports, has to change. And most important is last minute connectivity, which is safe and comfortable. The streets have to be safe and comfortable.
All right. What's interesting as well, we'll continue the conversation with both of our guests in just a minute. But what also is interesting with this study that found was there were some Asian countries and cities that made that list of those people being most fit, at least to that cell phone study. In fact, Hong Kong, China and Japan made that list. India, though, didn't seem to make that list. Could also be because of the population. Not as many people here have as many smartphones as in other parts of the world. But India, perhaps a report saying that could have one of the most laziest people in the world, at least based on this smartphone and steps. Here's an India perspective report.
A new study estimates that India ranks second on the list of lazy countries.
Just waking up in the morning, take my dog for a walk, and it's college basically till 9, so it's very hectic. But I love my college life basically.
Do you play any games?
I do.
What games?
Maybe NFS, GTA, Candy Crush. It's the most favorite game of all people here.
According to the study, 1 in 3 children in India does not have a healthy body mass index. They cannot sprint for their age and lack adequate upper body strength. 1 in 4 children lack desired flexibility. 2 in 5 children have low adequate lower body strength. The share of children with unhealthy BMI has increased from 20% in 2015 to 33% in 2016.
So do your schedule includes a walk or any kind of sports?
It does. It did in summer vacations, but there is nothing now.
Is there any sports which is a hobby?
No sports.
According to the Stanford Health Survey, the average number of steps in a country appears to be less important for obesity levels.
Does it include any walking, any kind of?
Yeah, a little bit, because we use elevators over there. They have provided us with elevators, so we don't need to climb the stairs and all.
The Stanford team say the findings help explain global patterns of obesity and give new ideas for tackling it.
Sleep is very good. I'm sleeping hour is like 8 to 9 hours. So the most questions is like, take the sleep, good sleep, 8 hours or 9 hours.
My daily schedule is very pissing off. From 8 in the morning, cooking food. I don't know how to cook food. From cooking food, learning to cook food, then getting fresh up and coming here from 10 to 8:30, then going back again cooking food, attending customers all day round, and just getting a week off, sleeping all day.
The researchers has used anonymous data from more than 7 lakh people who use the Argus activity monitoring app in their smartphone. It's another thing that only 17% Indians own smartphones. Sneha Mukherjee, WION.
All right, well, that is the India perspective when it comes to that. Let me bring in our guests again, Ira and Chetan. Let's talk about India perspective. The India angle with this story. A lot of people may exercise, they may walk. That doesn't mean that they're being tracked, though, because I may have a phone, but I may not be taking the phone and walking, so my steps aren't counted. So, Ira, do you think that the study could be perhaps flawed when it comes to that? The fact that it is really only tracking people with smartphones to really measure how fit or how fat a country is.
Not really, because many people in India do have smartphones, and it's not just amongst the wealthy. Now smartphones are being disseminated across all strata of society. So I don't think that it's an invalid sample size. And I do think that Indians may in fact be the laziest people in the world, some of the laziest. And I don't think, maybe it's not even, it could merely be because of our infrastructure, because our cities are not designed to walk. If we're looking only at cities right now, I would say that this is probably valid because we don't have sidewalks. There's a lot of traffic. It's haphazard. If you go into the villages, though, I think that you would see a different story. You would see people actually walking a lot more, moving a lot more, because they have to walk to get to places. There are no roads, so they don't have cars. So people are cycling more, they're walking more. So I do think it's also a matter of the cities that we're talking about. You, for example, had spoken about San Francisco, and San Francisco is a very walker-friendly city. And you have the weather to walk. In New York, on the other hand, while it is very walker-friendly, sometimes it can be quite cold, so people may not want to walk. So in India, you have the challenge of both temperature and also of infrastructure. So I do think that the data would be skewed in that perspective.
All right, let me bring Chetan back into the conversation. Chetan, your thoughts about that? In India, when we talk about, the study, does everybody you think who have phones are always using it? Perhaps how the study is being tracked by Stanford researchers? Maybe people in rural areas that may walk, may not walk, may run, may work out, may do whatever, but may not have their phone with them all the time. So who actually may be fit, but this data isn't really tracking that. Chetan?
I think so. I think there is some element of not getting the right kind of sample. We are much better than what is being projected in this particular study. People are walking, but there are those two issues mentioned by my earlier speaker. The climate and streets are not designed to walking. If this study was carried out in a city like maybe Chandigarh, maybe the walking and people going to parks would have been much more than what is being reflected in the study as a whole. And similarly, people walk more in villages where the streets are more walkable, covered with trees, and are safe. So this issue will always be there. And when we are using smartphones as a technology to track people in walking and cycling, we will have to adjust to the local Indian condition, and that would need some kind of adjustment for the data and data analysis. But broadly, yes, it's true that we are not walking as much as we should be.
All right, we'll continue the conversation in just a second, but let's take a look at some quick stats right now at which countries have the most number of steps and the least number of steps. So in essence, who is the most fittest and who is the most fattest. All right, at the top of the list, these are the countries that have the most fittest people. We have Hong Kong at about 6,880 steps, taking the pack. Indonesia, though, ranking at the bottom at 3,513 steps. In the top 5, we have Hong Kong, China, Japan, Ukraine, and Russia. They are the top 5. Well, there's also a bottom 5. These are in the bottom 5. South Africa, the Philippines, Malaysia, Saudi Arabia, and Indonesia in that country. There you're taking a look. India also in the bottom 5 there. India and the U.S., in fact, both on the bottom list. In fact, the Brits, though, are fairly active compared to other countries. The worldwide average, about 4,962 steps, with Americans at 4,774 steps, Indians at 4,927 steps. All right, well, here are the countries moving on now, the most obese and the least obese. So the least fittest and the most fittest. We have American Samoa, the Nauru, Cook Islands, the Tokelau Islands, Tonga and Samoa. They have the fattest people on earth, according to this report. Also on the list, Egypt, the U.S., Saudi Arabia and Ethiopia, Bangladesh, Nepal and Madagascar. They have the least obese people, according to this report at least. We also checked in about perspectives. A new report finds that Sweden, though, is in the top 7 when it comes to those who walk the most and stay fit. India, on the other hand, in the bottom half. Number 39, according to this list, WION's Johan Castell, who's lived both in Europe and Sweden and in India, thinks he has a reason why there's a difference between this country and India.
Well, Sweden is of course a very developed country compared to India. It's also a lot cleaner. So I think that staying fit in a place which has an infrastructure that can make it easier for you to exercise is obviously a lot easier. The atmosphere is cleaner, the air is cleaner, and I think it's overall much easier to live a healthier lifestyle. In Sweden, it's also cultural differences, meaning that in India, people live in an environment which is really warm, so they don't necessarily have all the equipment for, say, going to a place like Manali. In Sweden, if you want to go do a sport or something, Swedish people tend to have all the equipment. They love being active. A lot of people use their bikes for going to work, for example, and overall Swedish people are generally quite equally active. Most Swedish people have some kind of activity that they love to do, either be that sports or even biking to work just to maintain some kind of fitness level. A lot of people choose to take the stairs rather than to take the elevator when they go into their office and things like that.
All right, that is the perspective that we have. Let me go back to Chetan with regards to that. Your closing comments on this discussion when it comes to smartphones and steps. I mean, what do some of these countries who are perhaps on the bottom of these lists need to do to make sure their people are fitter? Chetan.
Yeah, I would put a lot of focus on making people conscious of the health and importance of walking, and of course also yoga. I think this both together, as much as we make people conscious about it, and it will mean a lot of orientation program for people as a whole. That would be first step. I will call it awareness building. Having done that, second would be provide those kind of opportunities to people where they could walk, do exercise, and also access these facilities. Very safe and very comfortable. I would mean that is livable our spaces. The third would be, how do you make people get into different kind of activities and change the culture where car is not a status symbol. I think it's the rich who should travel by public transport, and the public centers transport should have last minute connectivity, last mile connectivity, which will help them to walk or cycle to their offices and schools and other institutions. That would be a strategy as a whole. As a city planner, I would like to promote.
All right, we can only certainly wait and watch and find out if this study will perhaps look a little different when it's redone after these changes are implemented. Let me go back to Ira again really quickly. You, of course, know all about yoga. We've had you on the show before. Your closing comments with regards to this. What do some of these countries that perhaps are not the most fittest need to do to improve the health and well-being of their citizens?
The number one thing is awareness. While, of course, I think yoga is definitely a cure-all, and it has amazing benefits, not just on a physical level, but on a mental level. It works very well on your endocrine system. It helps beat stress, which is such a massive problem in this day and age. But it does that people don't have access to yoga. Not everyone has the access nor the awareness. So I do think that walking is the thing that people should do a lot of, and not just going on a 30-minute walk once a day. We have to keep in mind that you must keep moving. That is the natural state of the human body. So even if it's something like getting up from the chair when you're in your office and taking a 5-minute walk around the office, or if it's just including a 10-minute walk to work, from work. So everyone must be more aware of moving. And I do think that smartphones and devices like Fitbit and Apple Watches and so on and so forth have given access to that. So I do think that just keeping in mind that mobility is a crucial part of the human body, and that we must keep moving and throughout the day, breathing and moving throughout the day. And that is really the philosophy of yoga, of Hatha yoga. And I do think that this is a universal philosophy. You don't need to know yoga to know this. And so I really think that even doing shows like this,
right,
and me even speaking on it helps build awareness that we must keep on moving.
All right, we certainly appreciate all of that advice there, Ira Trivedi, as well as Chetan Vaidya. Thank you both for your perspective, smartphone and steps. That concludes this discussion. Thank you both for joining us. We do appreciate your insights.